My name is Maya Greene, and 3 months ago I watched my career burn down in front of 24 silent witnesses. I didn't lose it in some dramatic boardroom showdown or a messy scandal. No, I lost it sitting at my desk, with my fingers still hovering over the keyboard, as my manager, Carolyn Stokes, leaned over my shoulder and deleted every document I had spent the last year creating. She didn't even flinch. She announced to the entire department that my work was inefficient, unprofessional, and unnecessary. Then she clicked, and with one motion, wiped out 12 months of detailed reports, client engagement logs, personal follow-up notes, and every carefully crafted insight that had helped this company retain its most valuable clients. I remember the room going completely still. Phones stopped ringing. Keyboards froze mid-typing. People just stared at the screen and then at me, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. But I couldn't speak. My voice caught in my throat while my chest started to tighten like every breath had to push past a wall of disbelief. Carolyn stood behind me like she had won something. Her voice had that clipped confidence, the kind that tells a room she's in charge. She started talking about the need to return to efficient standards to cut the soft nonsense that was slowing us down. She didn't look at me, not once. She just kept pointing at the screen while my year of work vanished line by line. No one said a word. My teammates avoided eye contact like silence could make them invisible. I scanned the room looking for a single face that might offer some sign of support. I found none. The only sound was the low hum of the overhead lights and the occasional click of Carolyn's mouse. In that moment, I realized something far more devastating than losing my files. I realized I had been completely alone in that department all along. Every conversation, every laugh in the break room, every nod in meetings, they had all been surface deep. None of it meant anyone would stand up when I needed them to. And still, the most surreal part was that Carolyn seemed pleased, like she had finally eliminated a problem, like my work, my effort, my connections, my care was nothing more than digital clutter in her perfectly calculated system. She said we needed to streamline communication, and apparently that meant erasing anything that made our clients feel like real people instead of line items. My hands were shaking. I tried to move the mouse back, tried to undo what she had done, but she had already confirmed the deletion. It was gone. 54 pages of customized relationship maps, revenue-linked interaction logs, and handwritten notes from late-night follow-ups obliterated with a click. Just like that. I wanted to scream, to shout at her, to ask why, but all I could do was sit there frozen in my chair, swallowing the wave of humiliation that surged with every second. It wasn't just about losing the files. It was about losing the chance to prove that what I had built actually mattered. And in that silence, before anyone could move or breathe or offer a weak smile, my phone lit up. I glanced down, still dazed. The screen flashed a name I hadn't expected, a name that would change everything. But I'll get to that in a minute, because before that call, all I could feel was the brutal weight of public erasure. The kind that strips away not just your work, but your worth. When I first joined Insight Aura Solutions, I wasn't looking for anything grand. I just wanted a stable job after a messy layoff, something that paid the bills and didn't demand too much emotional bandwidth. The role was listed as Client Retention Coordinator, which sounded dull, even by corporate standards. Keep communication logs, updated schedule follow-ups, track feedback surveys, basic admin stuff, or so I thought. From the outside, it looked clean and structured. A quiet cubicle, a steady list of clients, a tidy schedule of tasks. But within weeks, I realized something was deeply broken. Client after client was disengaging. Some stopped responding. Others dropped contracts without explanation. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a slow, steady erosion that no one wanted to talk about. The woman I reported to, Carolyn Stokes, didn't seem concerned. She liked spreadsheets more than people. Her world was built on templates, formulas, and efficiency charts. She believed if a task took longer than 10 minutes, it was wasteful. Conversations with clients were to be timed, logged, and optimized, not enjoyed. Any attempt at emotional nuance was seen as a distraction. But when I read the client histories, something clicked. There were no voices in the files, just mechanical phrases. Thanks for your business. Attached is your invoice. Let me know if you have any questions. No names, no birthdays, no personal context. It was like we were trying to maintain loyalty without ever building a connection. I remember one of my first follow-ups with a client named Henry who ran a small logistics firm. During a quick check-in call, he mentioned offhand that his wife had just finished chemo. It was one of those moments you can't script. His voice cracked mid-sentence, and I could hear how raw he still was. I made a note. A month later, I sent a short message asking how she was doing. That's it. Nothing flowery. Just, I remembered. He wrote back a paragraph thanking me for being the first business contact who treated him like a human that year. 2 weeks later, he extended his contract and added a service we hadn't even pitched. So, I kept going. I paid attention when clients talked about kids' dogs' anniversaries and weekend trips. I stopped seeing them as accounts and started treating them like people. Not with grand gestures or holiday baskets, just honest curiosity and memory. One client told me her teenage son had just gotten into a state basketball tournament. I checked back after the championship and asked how the team had done. She nearly cried. Carolyn, of course, noticed. Not the results, but the behavior. She started questioning my call durations. Why are your notes so long? Why did this interaction take 40 minutes? She couldn't see that those minutes were what made the business stick. The hours I spent listening translated directly into dollars that didn't show up in her immediate KPIs. She and I were opposites from day one. She moved like a machine, punctual, polished, exacting. She believed in control that predictability equaled strength. I believed in people. I believed that when someone trusts you with a piece of their story, they're more likely to trust you with their business. Over time, the results started showing. Clients began requesting me by name. Renewal rates quietly crept up. We got unsolicited referrals. The kind of slow, steady success that can be hard to trace on a quarterly chart, but you feel it in the conversations. I was quietly building something durable, something real. But Carolyn only saw the deviation from protocol. There was one Friday when she pulled me into her office and asked if I was trying to run a therapy hotline. I smiled, but inside I knew we were playing two different games. She was managing output. I was building a connection. She didn't trust what she couldn't measure, and nothing about what I was doing fit neatly into her columns. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't. It felt like the only honest way to work. These people trusted us with their operations, their budgets, and their goals. The least we could do was know their names, their stories, what mattered to them when the invoices stopped. I didn't want to be another polite voice on the phone. I wanted to be remembered. That's how I found myself slowly, steadily reshaping what client retention meant inside a company that didn't want to believe it needed reshaping. That's how I became both invisible and indispensable. I didn't have a title that matched the impact. I didn't have power, but I had proof. Until the day Carolyn decided that proof had no place in her world. It happened during the quarterly strategy review. The CEO, Marcus Traynor, was going over client retention metrics when he paused, smiled, and said our numbers had reached a 3-year high. He credited a new personal engagement approach, said it was the kind of shift that set us apart in a crowded industry, and gave a subtle nod in my direction that didn't go unnoticed. The room was quiet, then filled with a polite ripple of applause. I didn't move. I could feel Carolyn's eyes on me like twin lasers burning through the back of my chair. She didn't clap. She didn't speak. She just stared with that tight jaw and too perfect posture that usually meant someone was about to pay for something. After the meeting, while people gathered their notes and exchanged niceties, she stopped me in the hallway. Her smile was a little too sharp, her voice a little too smooth. She said she wanted me to compile a full audit of all client communications over the past 12 months. Every call, every note, every email. She said it would help validate what the CEO mentioned. But it wasn't a request. It was a directive with an edge. I knew what this was. This wasn't about data. It was about control. About reasserting authority after being publicly undermined, even if no one had said her name. She needed to remind me that the scoreboard in her head still mattered more than any recognition from upstairs. She gave me 2 weeks. I'd have to pull records from 5 different systems, format hundreds of interactions, and justify every deviation from protocol. She made it sound like an opportunity. I knew better. This was a punishment dressed up as a procedure, and I'd have to smile through it or risk being labeled difficult. The worst part wasn't the volume of work. I could handle that. It was the tone in her voice, the precision in her language. She didn't care what the data showed. She wanted to bury me in documentation until the value of my approach disappeared under the weight of bureaucracy. She wanted to turn something human into something mechanical. That night, I stared at my laptop, blinking through lines of timestamps and client IDs. I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes. Not just the exhaustion, but the rage of being tested for doing something that actually worked. I was being asked to prove what she should have seen all along, and somehow I knew it wouldn't be enough. Not for her. Not ever. But I also knew this was a line. If I crossed it with grace, it would become more than just a report. It would become the case for everything she refused to understand. I poured everything into that audit. It took me 12 days of staying late, skipping lunch, and going home with my head spinning from cross-checking dates and outcomes. But I didn't just pull records. I told stories. I traced conversations to contracts, follow-up calls to referrals, and empathy to revenue. It was 50 pages of proof that human connection wasn't just nice, it was profitable. I built charts that tied check-in notes to retention. I logged client quotes that showed why they stayed with us, why they referred friends, and why they renewed without hesitation. I backed up every soft moment with a hard result. This wasn't fluff. It was a strategy with a soul. And when I finally compiled the last entry, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Pride. Carolyn scheduled a department meeting for that Monday, said we'd be reviewing client protocol and using my audit as a learning opportunity. I thought maybe she'd come around. Maybe the data was too strong to ignore. I was nervous but hopeful as I loaded the presentation onto the conference room screen. I should have known better. She walked in, nodded once, then dove straight in. But she didn't praise the report. She dissected it, line by line. Her voice never raised, but each word was a scalpel. She called my notes about client pets and vacations unprofessional. She said remembering birthdays blurred boundaries. She accused me of violating communication standards by treating clients like friends. I sat there, fists clenched under the table, while 23 coworkers stared at the screen in silence. They watched as she scrolled through my audit, pointing out every moment of care, as if it were evidence of failure. Then she said something that gutted me. She called my entire approach inefficient, said it undermined company values, and moved her cursor to the delete button. My heart stopped. I opened my mouth to protest, but my voice didn't come. I just watched as she clicked. Everything vanished. All the work, all the stories, all the proof. Gone in half a second. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's pen tapping nervously against their notebook. No one spoke, not even a whisper. I sat, frozen shame burning up the back of my neck as Carolyn turned away from the screen like she had cleaned up a mess. She expected me to nod to accept the reset, to rebuild things her way. But what she didn't understand, what she never could, was that those files weren't my real work. They were just the outline. The work lived in people, and that part she couldn't erase. Even if right then, I felt completely erased. I didn't remember walking out of the conference room. My legs moved on autopilot like they were trying to carry me somewhere that didn't ache so much. I made it down the hallway past the glass offices and muted stairs into the side stairwell where no one ever went. That's when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. My hands were still trembling and my throat felt tight. But when I looked at the screen, my breath caught. It was from a number I hadn't seen in a long time. A consulting firm called Havenwell Partners. I had met one of their founders 2 years ago at a networking event. We'd had a short but intense conversation about empathy in business, and I hadn't thought about it since. I answered with a whisper. The voice on the other end greeted me like an old friend. She said they'd been following my work quietly for months, intrigued by the unusual spike in Insightora's retention rates. Said she had a feeling it wasn't just a coincidence. Then she said they'd seen enough to know it was me. Not a system, not a department me. She didn't waste time. We want you, she said. We want what you do. We want to build our next growth phase around client relationships that feel like yours. She laid it out. A base salary almost double what I was earning. Equity, autonomy, a team that believed in leading with care. A blank page with my name at the top. I leaned against the cold stairwell wall and closed my eyes. It didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like recognition. After being dismissed, humiliated, and erased, here was someone saying, "We see you." Not for what's in your files, but for what's in your instincts, and we trust it. She said they didn't expect me to bring anything from inside Torah. No data, no clients, no documents. Just bring yourself. If clients choose to follow, that's their choice. If they don't, that's fine too. We're hiring you, not your portfolio. It was the cleanest, most respectful offer I'd ever heard. The timing felt surreal. Moments after being told my work was worthless, I was being invited to build something from scratch, based entirely on that same work. I didn't say yes right away. I told her I needed to think. But inside, I already knew. It wasn't just the money or the title. It was the fact that someone had been watching quietly, and now they were ready to bet big on what everyone else had overlooked. I hung up, still leaning against that stairwell wall, heart pounding in my chest. The tears that came next weren't from sadness. They were in relief. From validation. From that sudden shift when you realize the worst moment of your career might have just triggered the best. I wiped my face, straightened my jacket, and walked back down the hallway with a very different weight in my chest. This story wasn't over, not even close. When I walked back into the conference room, it felt like stepping onto a stage where the script had already been written without me. Carolyn was still at the front mid-sentence, clicking through a new set of slides about revised communication protocols. Her tone was clipped and smug, like someone who had just cleaned house and was proud of how tidy things looked now. No one looked up when I entered. I slid into my seat at the far end of the table. The same one where I had sat for over a year, the same one where she had dismantled my work without blinking. I took a breath, felt the folded offer letter still warm in my pocket, and stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clear my throat. I simply said I had something to announce. The room stilled. Carolyn paused mid-slide, her eyes narrowing. You could feel it. That ripple of confusion, then curiosity, then something sharper creeping in around the edges of every face in the room. I said I was resigning, effective immediately. There was a beat of total silence, the kind that makes you question whether you really said it out loud. But I had. My voice had been calm, unshaken. I reached into my pocket, unfolded the offer letter, and placed it gently on the table in front of me. Carolyn blinked. Then she laughed, short, disbelieving. She said quitting during a department meeting was unprofessional and that I was still subject to notice requirements and transitional duties. I didn't respond. I just turned the letter so she could read the header, the title, the number, the name of the firm. She read it. I watched the color in her face shift the way tension pulled at her mouth like a seam under pressure. One of my coworkers dropped their pen. Another leaned back in their chair like they suddenly needed more air. Carolyn tried again. Said I was throwing away a stable career for what, a boutique startup with no track record. I looked straight at her. Not angry, not spiteful, just done. I told her I had no intention of staying where leadership valued performance metrics over human trust. That I didn't need a transition period. I already knew what I was doing next. And I hoped sincerely that the company found someone better suited to her style of management. I gathered my things without a rush. No dramatics. No speeches. Just quiet motion, while a room full of people watched one person reclaim something invisible. My dignity, my direction, my voice. I walked to the door, paused for half a second, and then left. And with each step down that hallway, I felt the weight I'd carried for months begin to slide off my shoulders like dust that had finally lost its grip. My first week at Havenwell felt like stepping into a space built for who I already was. The office was smaller, the pace quieter, but the energy was real. No one timed my calls. No one asked why I was still talking to a client after 30 minutes. They trusted me to do what I did best. On Thursday morning, my direct line rang. It was Tom from Cypress Medical, one of our old clients. He said he'd heard I left Insitora and wanted to know if I'd be open to helping his team with a new project. We ended up talking for an hour, not just about scope and timelines, but about his daughter's first year in college and the lab renovation he finally finished. That afternoon, I got an email from Lacey, who ran a boutique hotel chain. She remembered the card I sent when her mother passed. Said she never forgot how personal it felt. Now she wanted to bring that same energy into a loyalty program she was building. She asked if I'd be willing to consult. Each conversation felt like picking up a thread that had never really been dropped. No pressure, no selling, just a quiet return to something that had already been built. By the end of the week, 5 clients had reached out. I hadn't made a single call. It wasn't a flood. It was a current. Steady, honest, strong. Each client reminded me that the work Carolyn tried to erase wasn't fragile. It lived in the moments we shared, in the way I remembered their stories, in the way they remembered being seen. Those small human details had rooted something deeper than loyalty. They had grown trust, and now that trust was choosing me all over again. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Within 3 weeks of my departure, Insitora lost 3 of its largest accounts. Clients stopped responding to check-ins pulled out of renewals, and in some cases, didn't even offer an explanation. What they couldn't say outright was simple. They didn't feel seen anymore. Carolyn tried to recover. She increased follow-up frequency, sent out standardized appreciation emails, and even introduced a feedback survey. But nothing stuck. The connections were gone. The names on her contact list had already made their decision. They had followed the person, not the brand. The board took notice. Retention plunged. Revenue projections fell apart. Emergency meetings were called. Carolyn blamed shifting market trends. She blamed team compliance. But no data point could explain why clients who once sang our praises now wouldn't even take a call. 6 weeks later, she was gone. The official statement used the word restructure. Everyone else called it what it was: a collapse in leadership. The strategy she defended so fiercely had turned to quicksand. She had erased what was holding everything together. Then the final call came. The new interim director reached out with an offer. Return as director of client strategy, full control, double salary, a chance to rebuild what they claimed to now understand. I thanked them for the consideration. Then I declined. There are moments in life when you get to choose what defines you. That call was one of them. I didn't need to go back and fix what I didn't break. I had already built something better. And this time, I wasn't asking anyone to see the value. It was already clear. These days, I wake up knowing I get to do work that feels like me. I get to lead a team that believes listening is strategy and kindness is currency. Every meeting, every call, every small moment where someone feels seen, that's the reward. We've built something real. Not just numbers or growth, but a culture that puts people first and means it. And that quiet sense of alignment, of being exactly where you're supposed to be, is the kind of victory I never expected but always hoped for. I didn't have to destroy anything to win. I just had to keep showing up as myself until the right place found me. That's the real power in knowing your worth. You don't have to shout it. You just have to live it. Have you ever been dismissed for doing the right thing? For choosing people over process care, over speed, heart over numbers? If that's ever happened to you, I hope you'll share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you handled it, what you learned, and what came next. And if you want more stories like this, real ones, raw ones, the kind that hit close to home, please subscribe. There's more to come.